grasses are incredibly diverse in form and size, and there's certainly grass for every location in the landscape. Today we're going to look at some plants that vary considerably in the functions that they play. We're going to start with one of our lower growing plants. This is variegated St. Augustine grass, and it makes a wonderful ground cover. It's very low growing, and it spreads by stolons across the ground. I pulled some up so you could kind of see how it'll grow and then root. You can see the roots attached to the base there. So it quickly will cover an area, and because of this really light colored variegation, this creamy yellow and green, it's a very bright plant, and I feel that it looks wonderful in the shady areas. It also tolerates sun, but the light coloration really does lend itself well to shady spots. Now, we grow St. Augustine grass as an annual. It's not hardy here, but it does spread very quickly in the springtime and will cover an area very nicely. We have a number of native grasses in our Blades and Plumes garden, and native grasses are a wonderful addition to the landscape because they tend to be very well adapted to the local conditions. Now, many of us think of grass as we think of prairies and sunny locations, but there are also grasses adapted to shadier sites, such as this one. This is northern sea oats, Chasmanthium latifolium. It's also called inland sea oats. It has a lot of common names. It has these very erect stems and nice long leaves that kind of arch over very gracefully, and you can see now it has a lot of movement in the wind. The stems tend to reach a height between 2 and 3 feet, and in the summertime it produces seed heads, and I have a seed head here, and the seed heads are very interesting. They kind of look like a bunch of fish hanging on a line, and they also provide great movement in the wind. Now, you might notice that the rest of our grass here doesn't have any seed heads on it, and there's good reason for that. The seeds the plant tends to spread very easily from seed. They'll fall off in the winter and the fall, and then we'll have many little seedlings come up in the springtime. And that might be ideal if you have a large garden where you're trying to cover a big space, but in a smaller area where you're trying to keep it contained, that could be a problem. So what we do is we let the seed heads entertain us in the summertime when they're nice and green, and you can see they're turning brown in the fall. They look very lovely as they go through this gold phase and into brown, but when they start to get brown, that's when they're going to fall off the plant. So we go through and cut them off, and that keeps us from having a problem with northern sea oats spreading. As we move into the sun, one of the natives we find is muley grass, Muhlenbergia lindheimeri, and this is a really delightful grass. I like it because of its very strong vertical presence. It has very erect stems. A lot of our taller grasses tend to flop over, but this one holds itself upright. And the blades are fairly narrow, and they have a nice bluish tinge to them, a really lovely color. The plant is native to Texas and northern parts of Mexico, and so it is quite tolerant of hot, dry conditions. It's going to do great here in Oklahoma. And you can see the plant is just getting ready to flower. There's a couple of stalks starting to push their way out, and they're going to rise up above the plant, and they'll start with a purplish color. You can kind of see it here. The flower head will be purple, and then it'll fade to gray, and they're going to remain intact over the winter. Another sun-loving native we have is the prairie grass, little blue stem. This is a wonderful plant. Many of us are quite familiar with it. This is a cultivar called the Blues, and it has some wonderful color in the stems. The stems are very thin, and they have a purplish blue color all season long. And we're getting close to the fall. You can see a little bit of orange starting to come in here. In the fall, the foliage is going to turn a beautiful rust orange color. It also will send up these light, fluffy seed heads above the foliage, and the birds absolutely love these. Now, our plants are weeping over a little bit. And one thing with some of our prairie grasses is they really don't like to get too much fertilizer or too much water. And what happens is they grow vegetatively, but their stems are a little weak and they fall over. And we knew this might be a problem, so we used some plant stakes to help hold them up. And this grid style stake works really well with grasses. But what happens with our prairie grasses is we need to just neglect them a little bit. Don't fertilize them, don't give them too much water, and they'll hold themselves up a little bit better. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of rain, so we couldn't control that this year. But native grasses are certainly a good choice for the landscape. You're going to have good luck with them in terms of adaptability to the climate, and it's also a great way to help feed some of our bird friends as well. Many grasses can also be used as a focal point or specimen in the landscape, and that's certainly true of our largest grass here, the Ravinia grass. And this is sometimes called hardy pampas grass because it has a very similar form to pampas, but it's hardy to zone 6, where most of the traditional pampas grasses were only hardy to zone 8, though a few are now able to be grown in zone 7. Now this is in a different genus. It's not a true pampas. This is Erianthus raviniae, and it is as big and bold as any pampas, though, and it has a beautiful form. The foliage reaches a height between 5 and 7 feet and produces a mound that can have a diameter up to 6 feet. So it's really a space taker in the landscape. And the flowers are just spectacular. They can reach heights of about 12 feet, and the feathery plume itself can be up to 2 feet long. And these will start appearing at the very late summer, early fall. They'll hang on into the winter. The foliage is also very attractive. It's a bit wider than what we see in the pampas, and it has a white midvein, giving it a nice lighter appearance. Very pretty plant. Certainly going to make a bold statement in the landscape. Well, the last grass I want to look at is over in our patio garden. I couldn't mention plant form and function without talking about Forester's feather reed grass, or Calamagrastis acutiflora. This is a remarkable plant when it comes to plant structure. The leaf blades are somewhat unassuming. They're very nice, slender, and deep green. They produce a clump about 2 foot by 2 foot. But what we're really interested in with this plant are the flower stalks, and these start to emerge in June, and they're incredibly upright and very straight. And they'll reach heights of between 4 and 6 feet, so they're going to be at least 2 times taller than the foliage. And what they do is just produce this magnificent vertical architecture, which creates a great deal of contrast in the garden and sets them apart from surrounding plants. It looks wonderful, especially against some of the more rounded form perennials.